Welcome to the Vision for Life podcast, an ongoing conversation between the pastors of Fellowship Denver and the church at large. Each week, we talk about life, faith, the Bible, and how to follow Jesus as we go about our daily lives. I'm Autumn, host of the podcast, and Clark, one of our pastors here at Fellowship, is joining me today. Clark, thanks for being here.
Hey, Autumn. I am glad to be here and talk about local politics in Colorado.
That's what we're going to try to talk about today.
In a big attempt.
Yes. A couple weeks ago, Hunter and I looked at the election results and made some observations, drew some themes out of what happened in our most recent election, and focused mostly on themes from the federal election, talked about kind of bigger themes. And Clark, in our conversations just at the office, which aren't that many because you work up at our North Metro congregation and live in that part of the city. I work down at our South Broadway congregation. So we really only overlap on Tuesdays. Tuesdays are full of meetings. But when Clark and I get to talk, we tend to often talk about schools because Clark was a teacher.
Yeah.
You were a teacher before this pastor gig that you have now.
Yeah, I started working in Denver Public Schools in 2011, and I did that until I resigned my position to plant a church in north side of the city. And before that was a teacher in downtown Houston. So I've been around and been around education quite a bit.
And now we both have kids who are school age, who are impacted by the state
Right.
of schools in our various local areas.
All the things that I learned as a teacher now directly impact my life. And I have to make really hard decisions, it feels like, all the time. School choice opens today.
Yeah,
So
I know.
Yeah.
I got the text, I got the call.
Yeah. Well, my phone is now on Do Not Disturb, so I can't get that text.
School choice only opens today if you're in the Jeffco school district. If you live in Littleton Public Schools, or your kids go to Littleton Public Schools, school choice.
Not today.
Round 1 already passed.
Good luck if you're in Littleton.
If you live in DPS, it's different dates.
We really hope that you did not just learn that at this moment
on
right
our
now.
podcast.
Yeah. We're starting middle school this year with our older daughter.
Yeah.
So we've been doing all the middle school tours, and we've been through the ringer with schools. We've been part of school closures and switching schools, and it's been a mess. So this election felt really important for our own life in a lot of ways.
Definitely. I mean, I have a middle schooler headed into high school this year. So I've already been through this process of selecting high school once, although it ended up meaning that I selected high school twice because we moved my daughter, my oldest, after her 9th grade year. But my son is headed into high school this year. So it's a live conversation in our household as well. And what he values and wants as far as his choice of school is this. It's one thing. Where are my buddies going? And that differs slightly from what I, as his parent, value. I value that. It's not that I don't care where his friends are going, but...
Autumn, I'm going through the same exact thing for middle school. The school that I want my daughter to go to is not the one that she wants to go to because her friends are going to a different school.
Yeah.
So what do I do? Did you figure it out?
Oh, well, I mean, ultimately, I think I'll make the choice. Jason and I will make the choice that we think checks a few boxes that we would value for Axel. Evidence of some solid academics. It doesn't have to be the highest performing, but just I want to know that
it's
decent, that he'll get a solid education.
Yeah.
And I don't want him, if possible, if there's a friend or two there, wonderful. I'm not attempting to make his life miserable. But another thing that I would look at is the school environment. So we have these discussions with him. We'll make the decision and hope that he comes along in the decision with us.
Good luck.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've done this once before. It was a bit of a painful process.
Yeah.
But had a good outcome.
Yeah.
So with Aspen, this is exactly what happened. My choice of school, ultimately where she ended up, was not her choice of school. And now she says that it was a good decision. But it took a while to get there.
Yeah, you got to get there. You got to make your friends, feel at home.
Yep.
Big choices.
Big choices. All right. So let's talk about local politics for a little bit. And then we'll talk about local politics and why that matters for us as the people of God in Denver. And as we live within our local church, when I say the people of God, I have that in mind. So not only us as individuals, but us as the church in Denver, and how these matters of local politics impact us, but beyond that, how we have influence in our local area. So I did want to start with just looking at what happened in this last election cycle in the state of Colorado.
Let's do it.
All right. So just a few observations about how Colorado trended in this last election. Colorado followed national trends in terms of the federal election. So on our previous podcast, in numerous articles, you can see that there were many different demographic groups that experienced a shift right in this last election, meaning more people voted for President Trump, for incoming President Trump, than was suspected initially, and then voted for Kamala. So there were some shifts in certain demographic groups who voted more red or Republican in this last election. And Colorado followed that national trend to some degree, but not to the same extent as much of the rest of the country. But one notable shift in Colorado was that heavily Hispanic counties did shift to the right or shift Republican more significantly than other areas.
Yeah, which followed a nationwide trend.
Yeah, that part of it held true in Colorado. Yeah. You noted something, Clark, interesting. There's an article that you and I looked at in coloradopolitics.com that has the election map of Colorado, and it shows that, much like many that you can look at, this particular one shows what area of the state went heavily blue.
Yeah.
What went heavily red or more red.
Yeah, when you take a look at just this color-coded map of how the state of Colorado voted, expectedly you can see that our major urban areas kind of stuck to the same trends that they've been following, and went heavily Democratic. And normally, I think one of the interesting things about Colorado is we have this other kind of area we call like the mountain region of the state, which is incredibly wealthy. You follow along these cities of Breckenridge and Vail, Keystone, moving down through Aspen, and like they're kind of considered a little bit more rural. They're not necessarily urban in the sense of some of our major cities, but also voted heavily Democratic as well. So you kind of have these 4 different quadrants of the state that run just straight north and south of our outsides, kind of really rural areas voting conservative, and a little bit in the middle there as well voting conservative. But it does seem, and I don't necessarily have the data to prove this, but it does seem that in Colorado, our voting did seem to kind of follow some financial lines in how they shook out in the end.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting observation. That also follows some national trends, that the divides in the voting trends this year were primarily by class. There still were divisions by race,
right.
as we've seen, but those were less obvious this year, or those demographic groups that are indicated in the polls and in the results by race shifted more Republican than they had in past years. But the big dividing line this year seemed to be along the lines of wealth and to some extent education, higher education.
Right. Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting thing you pointed out on the map. The part of the state that I am from, that I grew up in, which is the eastern side of the state, the entire eastern portion of the state voted Republican. It isn't as heavily red as if you look at the national election map, you see some areas of the country that are very red. There's no section of Colorado that quite looks like that, but the eastern side of the state definitely voted Republican.
Yep.
And the wealthier western part of the state from the Front Range, the cities where we live, over towards the west
Right.
voted Democratic.
Yeah.
In our statewide elections this year, Colorado, as far as our state house and Senate, for a while now, has been heavily Democratic. That is still true, but the Democrats lost what was called their supermajority. And so even though the state house and Senate are still controlled by the Democratic Party, the margin shifted just slightly this year. In a couple of counties and places that were districts, I should say, that were a little unexpected.
Right.
A couple of Republicans won in those districts. We're not trying to draw a distinct conclusion or conclusions about the election map or about what districts went more Republican or Democratic, but simply to say, like, what is the makeup of the people who we live around?
Yeah.
How does this help us know something about our state, something about our local area, and about our neighbors?
Right.
And we want to live thoughtfully and to love our neighbors well. And so all of these exercises, looking at some things that are true of our local political scene and what is true in our state political makeup, help us just know our state, the people around us, in a way that lets us love them thoughtfully.
Totally. And it really does point to the fact, even though the places that would be dark red or dark blue, there's still a large number of people in those areas. So there's a really good chance that you're going to run into folks who disagree mightily on political things. In a lot of ways, we're still a pretty divided state with no clear collective agenda on how to move forward.
Right.
Which is, you kind of see that same trend nationwide.
Yeah.
A lot of just people on both sides. So it takes a lot of thought to be able to navigate our culture well, knowing that that is just true of where we live.
Yeah. That people probably hold many different perspectives and you'll encounter all of those different kinds of people as you go about your life in the city, but particularly statewide in the state.
Right.
The different attitudes and perspectives that you'll encounter.
I mean, you drive an hour west, you're going to cross very different political boundaries, and you will see all different sorts of political signs. And you can actually see how different cities respond differently to the current political climate.
Yeah.
It's actually very easy to see just through your windshield.
There's one observation that you and I did make about the election map, and that is many of the poorest areas of the state are in the red areas of the election map.
Right.
So many of the poorest areas of Colorado have people who voted Republican, which also it follows national trends.
Right.
But the counterintuitive part of that is that Democrats are usually the party that is lauded for improving the social safety network and putting more money into social programs and making more resources or support available to people who are in a lower income bracket. But that hasn't been the recent perception among the people who are actually in that lower socioeconomic class.
Yes.
They haven't perceived the Democratic Party is going to help them in those ways.
And it just makes me think that is there a change happening right now in what and how people are viewing politics as the mechanism to get them what they need. Where historically the poorer places have voted Democratic and maybe they're not so much anymore. So what is the thing that is actually driving them to vote the way that they are voting? Yeah. It does seem that I don't want to identify what that is, but it's changing, whatever it is. We can say that it's changing.
Yeah. Yep. I don't have an answer to your question, but one anecdote stands out in my mind from my childhood. My best friend growing up was Mexican. Her mom's family had immigrated to the United States from Chihuahua when her mom was 10. And this family loved me and took me, and I spent so much time over at the Garcia's house. And her mom's whole family settled in southeastern Colorado. Her grandpa farmed. He still does. And one of her uncles who called me Whitey for my whole life. If he saw me today, he still would. I saw him a couple years ago, and he still calls me that because I stuck out a little bit hanging out with their family all the time. But he, as I was being shaped in my understanding of politics as a child, one thing stands out about him. So my best friend's uncle, who was like my uncle, he always talked about politics in a way that was about economics. And I realize that now as an adult, but as a kid, what it sounded like to me was, I want to vote for whoever will let me keep most of my money.
Yeah.
So in his mind, his question was, who's going to raise taxes? Or
You're
who's
right.
going to lower taxes?
Right.
And I want to vote for the person who's going to maintain or lower taxes. And that was pretty much it. That was his only barometer that I ever heard him talk about in terms of voting. And so, interestingly, in my childhood, the person who I remember talking about that very clearly was a like first generation Hispanic immigrant to the United States.
And maybe that is what we're seeing shake out across our state now.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
A few years later, everyone caught up with
yeah, caught up with the Garcias.
Caught up with the Garcias.
He knew.
All right. Well, let's talk about, Clark, a couple of particular issues that factored in this recent local election. I already mentioned that you and I tend to chat about schools
Yeah.
when we get to talk quite a bit. And there were a couple of particular ballot initiatives that people in the state and or Denver, the Denver area, voted for this year. And so I wanted to ask you in particular about the state of schools in and around the metro area, to hear some of your observations about how this factored not only into our recent local election, but into our local politics kind of repeatedly.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one I think that is worth considering. But to give a little bit of background, I drove to Denver in 2010. And I knew I wanted to move here because I thought the mountains were cool. And I was teaching in Houston, so I drove to the city on my spring break, and I just randomly started driving to high schools, and I would walk into the front office and ask if I could work there. And eventually was hired at a school on they call it the far northeast side of Denver, which Denver has this weird little arm that kind of like moves up towards the airport.
It's true.
And because
it
of a lot...
exists because of the airport.
Yeah, it does exist because of the airport. But because of a lot of political activity and, I mean, essentially just racism back in the 80s, most of our poorer families moved up to this part of the city, which is now called the far northeast. Specifically, the place that I got a job was in the Montbello neighborhood. And I walked into a school in downtown Denver, and the principal said, "Hey, I'm actually leaving this school to go open up a brand new school. We're getting a ton of money for it, and it's going to be called Noel Community Art School in the Montbello neighborhood." And she said, "I want you to come, and I want you to be my high school math and science teacher." And I thought, great, here's my ticket to Denver. And that was, 12 years ago. That school permanently closed. And like, it is shocking to me to think about the amount of resources that went into that building just to make it a functioning school, all of the things that we had to do to pull off an art school. And I only say that to say that the resources that voters put into that years ago it hasn't come to be. Like, it was actually just a massive loss of money. And then now when you're looking at this most recent election, you're actually kind of seeing some of the same things happen. Even on this ballot, there was a bond for Denver Public Schools that can only be used for construction cost and renovating buildings. And we now know that many of the buildings that are going to be doing this are on slate to close in the coming years because of the declining enrollment in Denver Public Schools. And I'm not really just sure what to make of that. For me, it's just a little bit confusing, and it makes me wonder, like, do we have clarity in our local politics around what's happening, at least within the school system? And there's a lot of other things that I think as a prior educator, like there are things that schools could do with funds that would move the needle, but it's hard for me to understand how renovating a building and then closing that building 2 years later is the thing that's going to move the needle. So it just makes me kind of ask the question of like, is there an awareness in local politics in the same way that there might be with federal politics and how we vote and what it is doing and impacting the kids in our city and the educators in our city and even just in the public school system?
Yeah, this is one of those issues that interestingly touches everyone who lives
Right.
in a certain municipality and pays taxes, because you are funding and supporting the schools in a couple of ways. One, just via living there and paying your taxes. And the second way that this is particular to DPS is perhaps in other areas surrounding Denver Public Schools as well. So this is true in some of the other districts around us. But where our church is, where South Broadway is in Denver, and then where our North Metro congregation meets in Jeffco, the voters in those two districts have been very favorable towards giving more money in different ways. So sometimes that's via a mill levy. Sometimes that is via a bond measure like this one was that you mentioned. And those are usually earmarked for something specific. But voters pass those in the area that we live. So as you're mentioning, like we, the people who live in a certain area, have continued to give money towards the school systems, sometimes for very specific causes. But as far as I know, since I've lived in Denver, every time there's been one of these measures on the ballot, we pass it.
And it's like, not only does that impact where our resources are going, even like as we pass these things and pay our taxes, also like step into the mind of a teacher who can't really afford to live where they work on a teacher's salary. And they see schools being renovated and then shortly closed down to not be used anymore. It feels a little off to just say like, the only thing I want to do is be able to just buy a house, and I cannot do that with the salary that I'm paid in a public school. And I know many educators still, and it's a little just disheartening for them when they're working harder than almost anybody I know, and class sizes of 35 kids. And it seems to be that this money just isn't going to the places that it needs to go. But it's because of how these ballots get set up and many years prior of work to get there. But it just makes me at least like, does Denver Public Schools have a long-term vision for how to move the needle in education in our city? And I don't know the answer to that, but it at least makes me want to ask the question.
Yeah, definitely. I think there are more than this, but two compelling reasons for anyone who lives in a given area to take an interest in the state of the schools, the K-12 schools in their area. And one is this matter of public funding that you just mentioned. And the other is that schools have historically been one of the anchoring institutions of neighborhoods.
Right.
And I know as cities have grown, as people have become more mobile, the nature of where we can travel in a given day is different. Even so, healthy schools in a given neighborhood are often, the health or decline of a school is indicative of kind of the state of the whole neighborhood or the community around it. And so it should be of interest to us for that reason as well, that healthy schools tend to indicate that there are healthy communities, and that is good for our city.
Yeah. I had no idea when I moved here in 2011, when I was taking the job at Noel Community Arts School, that I was just unaware of the political implications that were going on at that time, and that Montbello High School had been such a staple for that community, this community that had been ostracized and had developed their own culture. For them to get Montbello High School was such a matter of pride for them. And they were winning track state championships. And then the school district came in and closed down Montbello High School for the sake of all these new schools that they were going to be doing, this art school, this tech school. And it was such a political fight at that time. I had no idea what I was walking into because it really took out of this neighborhood such like a monument that they had fought in the past to get their own high school. And it just goes to show that these actually do matter to communities a ton.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really live issue right now in terms of just the overall state of schools in the city and what this points us to as far as trends we can observe, whether you have kids in school or not. So you mentioned already that some of the schools that have received funding to work on their buildings within the last couple of years are now schools that are slated to close. Mm-hmm. So in DPS, Douglas County, the Douglas County School District, the Adams School District, Jefferson County, school closures are an issue this year and will continue to be for the next couple of years as our various districts attempt to address the issue of declining enrollment. And so one of the issues that will continue to be discussed at a school board level and at a district level, and then among the people who it's going to impact, is what happens in terms of those school closures, where those students go, what the makeup then of the schools that feel this effect will be, how those shifts will impact the families and kids affected by school closures or by school merges. And then the other question attached to that is, because of the system of school choice that we do have in place in Denver, students have some degree of, families, not just students, but families have some degree of decision-making power about where they want to send their child.
Right.
And so the question then also becomes, what if our overall population of students is declining for various reasons, declining birth rates and high cost of housing are the two most prominent reasons cited by superintendents and school boards. If that's true, then the fight for who gets what share of the pie of students among public schools, charter schools, private schools will ensue. And because that's all tied to the funding model.
Yep.
So all of these are issues that impact not only our families, but I think our whole community.
Right. Yeah. It's and it's why we're seeing like the school choice thing consistently show up on the ballot right now, because everybody's asking this question and they're trying to balance between what's the best thing for my family and what's the best thing for my community. And many times I think families are finding those two things might be at odds with one another, and it is forcing parents to make choices. For me, my daughter's elementary school was closed down 2 years ago, as well as the 4 elementary schools that were closest to my house. So all of a sudden, we got thrown into this realm of school choice, and it just made us, we had to make choices in that time.
You have to reassess your values and your priorities in that whole process. Yeah. You mentioned school choice. That was one of the other specific issues on the ballot. There was a proposed amendment, Amendment 80, that was on the state ballot this year, and it would have stated, the language in that proposed amendment was that every K through 12 child would have the right to school choice. And the other quote from the way that it was worded is that parents have the right to direct the education of their children. And it lost about 52% of people who voted against it, and about 48% voted for that proposed change to the Constitution that would have stated that school choice was a right. So I don't exactly know what to make of that. There are a lot of theories as to why people voted against it, what it would have actually meant downstream. It's always hard to know when something like that is put on the ballot as a proposed constitutional amendment, what all of the downstream effects will be.
Yeah. And you have to think about what that looks like as well across the state. We live in a pretty unique space where school choice is a live thing for us, where there is, 6 to 10 different elementary schools that I could reasonably send my kid to. You go out to some of our more rural areas of the state, there's one choice.
Right.
So how much does it really matter for voters across the state? And it really is driven as well by just your geographic location. And then there's always a fear of like, is this going to cost me more money if this does pass? Am I going to be taxed more to be able to send a kid in Denver to the school that they want to go to when I live in Weld County?
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure entirely how to make heads or tails of that proposed amendment. We do already, like you said, have a system of school choice, especially in the metro areas. Most of the metro areas in the state have some version of school choice that includes the ability to send your children to a neighborhood school or to a public school that is not your neighborhood boundary school, not the one you're assigned to. And then parents always have the choice whether to, in Colorado at the moment, all have the choice whether or not they want to homeschool or send their children to a private school. So nothing about the fact that that amendment was voted down changes any reality on the ground for parents right now. So I think we continue as is with those options. The one very interesting thing about that particular ballot initiative that I still am not going to draw any conclusions about, but is the matter of funding, public funding for alternative types of school, and especially for religious or private schools. And this has been an issue that has come up in some other states. And while this amendment didn't say anything about it, I think that some people worried that if Amendment 80 had passed and school choice is stated as a right in the Constitution, then it might also follow that, like you said, we as taxpayers might have to pay for whatever form of schooling people might choose.
Right.
So, yeah. The second issue that you and I wanted to talk about today, Clark, is something that was on the state ballot. It was Prop 130. And that is that we, as Colorado voters, gave a bunch of money to law enforcement.
$350 million.
$350 million. Yes. And you mentioned that Prop 130 listed a few things that money is supposed to go towards.
Yeah, it was hiring of new police officers, training, resources, as well as a $1 million fund to the family of any officer who is killed in the line of duty. Okay. So, like happened in a few areas of our recent state and local elections, there are some interesting things that are kind of at odds with the overall cultural ethos, or the recent kind of cultural ethos. And this is one of them. It does follow, again, national trends, but it's interesting that in a place that is still heavily Democratic, in a state that voted like very clearly Democratic, that something like this proposition passed pretty easily this year, and that we're giving more money to law enforcement. Yeah, it was. I was pretty actually surprised to see this pass the way that it did, just knowing our cultural ethos over the last few years has been, I thought it was the exact opposite of how we did not want to do this. And I was a little bit surprised as well. I remember reading that for the first time, and I thought, this doesn't really say anything about like de-escalation techniques or, and you even see in this
funding the STAR program that provides mental health support.
You see that it's for like training, physical fitness, restraint. I was like, I thought these were all the things that we did not want to happen, at least in that movement that has been happening in our culture.
Right.
So to see it pass, I was a little bit surprised.
I found it interesting too, that not only was it one of the propositions that passed fairly easily in this last election, but our state legislators slated discussion about Prop 130 and how to implement it and how to fund it for their first legislative session of the year. So they're going to talk about things pertaining to senior care. They're going to talk about a Medicaid rate freeze. And then one of the other major things they're talking about is how to put Prop 130 into place.
Yeah.
Which tells me that they have a sense that voters want something to happen in this regard.
Yeah. I imagine this will be quite the battle in our state to see how those funds actually get distributed and what they are actually used for in the end.
So once again, I think that these two issues, K-12 education, are going to continue to factor heavily in our local discussions. I think issues around school closures are going to continue to surface in our local political conversations, and I think statewide as well. Mesa County is on the western side of the state and is experiencing some of the same things and having some of the same discussions. And then this matter of law enforcement and the whole discussion nationwide about law and order,
Right.
and the desire for an orderly society,
Right.
reliable management of crime, safe cities. I think that these conversations are really live in our local area right now.
Yeah, totally. And the thing that this always makes me think about as a pastor, I'm always trying to keep a pulse on what are people thinking in our city? What are the driving motives behind people? What do people actually need? I'm kind of curious, Autumn, like, what do you think are the things? Like, what does this actually tell us about our city and our state that we live in? What are the maybe like the idols that are there, or the themes that are popping up? What does it tell you about the people that we're around and our neighbors?
Yeah, if we ask, that's such a good question to ask. What does this reveal about what we value? And what does this reveal about what our idols are? We being people who live in Denver or in Colorado even. I think one idol that this reveals, it could be either. It's a value that definitely can become an idol, become something that people worship, is just personal autonomy, or
Right.
the idea
Yep.
of personal autonomy, even though I think it's farcical. None of us actually can live that way. But people who live in Denver and in these urban areas that we live and work in really value personal autonomy.
Yeah, we want to be able to make our own decisions, be in charge of our own lives. And it makes me ask, if is there like a hesitation around like personal sacrifice and how that would impact people around me. It does seem that there might be some tension that exists there when people have to decide between one or the other. Like, do I take a cost upon myself to see people helped? Do I see schools thrive? Because to see those things always come at a personal cost in some way. Sometimes it's just a little bit more of taxes that we pay, and sometimes it's like actual community involvement that we have to get into. Like, you're serving in schools, you are in your kids' classrooms, you are at a local shelter helping do whatever it is that they need to do. But all these things always come at some personal cost, whether it is something that we can easily identify, or maybe it's just a little bit more money taken out of a paycheck.
Yeah. I think one of the prevailing attitudes in Denver that I experience is something you're hitting on right there, Clark. And I would call it one of the ways that this gospel of personal autonomy and gospel of individual expression gets fleshed out. Many people in Denver want to be on the right side, at least outwardly, of whatever the progressive zeitgeist of the day is. Not everyone. That's why I said this is one of the prevailing attitudes I encounter. So ideologically, I want to be on the right side of whatever issue it is, the immigrant issue, the LGBTQ issue, the school issue. I want to be with whatever the cause is that makes me a good, I'm using air quotes, a good or moral person.
Right.
I want to give lip service to that. I will even probably be willing to give more taxes to that, or to approve a measure to support whatever this cause is, whatever this social justice cause is, or this need is. But when it comes to the matter of personal comfort and sacrifice, I think people are much more reticent, or to be confronted with actual human suffering, people are much more hesitant. So for instance, I want to believe that being a sanctuary city is the right thing to do.
Right.
But please don't turn a hotel down the street into an immigrant shelter, because then that's bringing the crime and the suffering to my neighborhood.
Yep.
And I think that attitude is fairly prevalent in just in our city.
Yeah, I see this regularly in the part of the city that I pastor in. Even I've had meetings with the mayor lately to discuss our transient population and how do we actually help these people on nights that are really cold. And we're trying to set up cold weather shelters, but there's actually a lot of community-wide hesitation around this, because what that means is a large group of people who don't live there are going to be in a neighborhood, and then that neighborhood gets upset when people that they historically just haven't wanted in their neighborhood are there. And they are having to make the choice between, do I do the thing that is morally right if it impacts my daily life? And it's caused a lot of tension in our city because nobody really knows what to do with it.
Yeah. I think I do personally experience this tension to some degree as well. So, for instance, there's a park down the street from our house that I always let my kids just walk to on their own. And for many years since we've lived in the neighborhood, that was not a problem. I was never concerned about what they would encounter at that park. And then in recent years, as the homelessness crisis has really kind of taken hold in Denver, and because of different moves that have been made downtown, more people have been pushed to further out in the city.
Right.
That's why Arvada is experiencing this as well. And now it's not uncommon for homeless individuals to be sleeping in that same park. Or it's possible that my kids would find drug paraphernalia in that park. And suddenly then I experience this very real tension where, of course, I don't want that for the person who's experiencing homelessness either. But suddenly my value point is shifted. Like, what I really don't want is for my kids to encounter that at that park. And both of those things can be true, but it's hard to figure out what to do or to reconcile them.
It just shows how complicated of a question this actually is. It's not as simple just to say, do the right thing.
It's not. But when our highest value is personal autonomy, then it becomes almost impossible to figure out how to appropriately sacrifice on behalf of the people who really need some assistance.
Yeah. And that to me is a thing as a pastor that I want to actually help people think through. Is there too much of a desire for your autonomy that it is impacting people around you who you could help, who you are called to love and you are called to care for? And at the same time, it takes a lot of nuance, because there are some, you need to do it in a way that like keeps your kids safe at the same time. Because you might have competing objectives when you get into that.
What are some other ways that this gospel of personal autonomy and gospel of individual expression and individual freedom factored into this most recent election cycle?
I also saw this showing up in the constitutional amendment around abortion, where now that is a right for citizens. That to me is just talking about the autonomy and we want to do what we want to do attitude that exists in our state. And it's really kind of saying like hands off. And now that is a statewide law that exists.
Yeah. That is stated as a right in the Constitution. Yeah. I think it's obviously, these are a couple of what we named are a couple of big ways that belief, that functional kind of gospel. I used the word gospel because we adhere to it in an almost religious way. And it becomes sacrosanct then for someone to question something about your identity or about your choices, about what you do with your time, or about anything that is an expression of that personal freedom, that gospel of personal freedom, which is why I chose that word intentionally. I think it shows up in other smaller ways too. Just like one of the primary concerns of people who live in this kind of wealthy urban corridor is that they have enough money for leisure activities.
Yes. That to me is like always the thing in Colorado. It's like, do not touch that. Like we must have opportunities to do the things that we love to do. That's why we're here. It's why we move here. And so you see that kind of showing up as well. And that we want to be our own individuals and do what we love. And it is off the table to ever touch that.
Yeah. So you mentioned kind of having this pastoral perspective earlier. As you watch what happens in our local election and you look at these results from the election and you're asking, what does this reveal about what people in our area value? And then what does that mean as far as how we minister to them and pray for them? And what does this mean about the needs, the actual real needs in our local area? So we said one of those things that it reveals is this gospel of personal autonomy runs strong.
Yes.
And not only in Denver, we're talking about it in our context because this is where we live and work and go to church and witness. But our state election results revealed a version of this really across our state. Even in the areas that voted more Republican, this particular issue, this gospel of personal autonomy, does not fit into political boxes. It is something that anyone of any political persuasion has a version of that they pursue and adhere to. So that would be one theme. But what's another theme that you're looking at?
Yeah. Something else that I have really started to pay attention to, and this has been birthed out. I've kind of just been like obsessed with what many are calling the meaning crisis that we're finding ourselves in. There is a desire inside of every single human being to be a part of something that's bigger than themselves. They find their value in that. They find their life satisfaction in that. And it's really all rooted in the question of what's the meaning of life? Why am I here? And I think politics offers a version of an answer to that question. And what we see is that everybody's actually looking for a leader. Who can I follow? Who can I kind of push all the chips in with? And because we all want that. We all want to be involved with something that's bigger than ourselves. And it's making me go, is this why we're actually seeing this rise in populism right now? Really charismatic leaders who know how to rally a base. And that seems to be one of the main driving factors of politics today. And I don't think Colorado is an exception to that. Even in the places that voted in Trump's direction, much of that seems to be a populism-driven voting ethos, that this is a leader that they feel like they can get behind, that's going to do the things that they want to do. And you hear these kind of statements where people say, I will do anything, I will die to see this person elected. That helps me identify that this might be a populist leader that we are interacting with. And then historically, Biden didn't really have the charisma to match that. But you saw a little bit of that with Harris as well, trying to rally a base and follow the person and the idea. And that seems to be, just culturally speaking, what people are really looking for right now in Colorado. Like, who do I follow? Who do I lead? And we get so invested in that. And in a lot of ways, that can become really dangerous territory as well.
It's interesting that, as with many of the things we've observed about this recent election, these two themes, the gospel of personal autonomy and the desire to find a kind of fulfillment through political action or through a political leader, through a particular political leader, are again seemingly a little bit in tension with each other. So like the gospel of personal expression and individual freedom says, like, I want to be free. The simplest way to say it is it's summed up in you do you.
Yeah.
And yet this desire for, as you said, something beyond ourselves, someone to follow. Perhaps there's some adherence to like what leader represents me in a way that I feel like I can live out this version of freedom that I want to pursue. And yet this desire for some sort of figure, a leader that is concurrent with a part of the rise of populism is interesting. There's a tension between those two themes.
Yeah. And it makes me wonder if people have historically tried to hold those two things together, and that is what is now collapsing around us. I at least believe that it is impossible for any individual human on their own to find meaning in their life. You just can't do that. You can't actually say that this is what I'm here for if it's only just you. You actually need to be tied to something bigger than yourself because we are a finite being. There is a point where we die and that meaning will just go away. And we all kind of know that. And it's kind of driving this cultural angst right now. And when we tie ourselves to leaders who maybe have a lasting impact, it at least gives us a little bit of hope in that maybe that's the thing that will help me get meaning. And what I need to do is put my energy behind this political party to get there. But I still think that's always going to fall short. And I think what we're starting to see, we saw it just this week in the Democrats historically have been purporting to hold the higher moral ground in our culture. And they would point at Republicans and say, you guys, I can't believe that you're doing this and doing this and doing this. There's felonies that are involved.
That you elected this guy who's a criminal.
Right, yeah. And then President Biden this week pardoned his own son, who is a felon, and was looking at a significant prison sentence. And it really has kind of pulled the rug out from underneath the moral high ground. And now it's left a lot of confusion in its wake because the leader that we were following, the ideal that we were following, collapsed like literally overnight. And now it's kind of back to square one. So what do you do with that in our culture?
To your point that people are seeking something, you alluded to a search for meaning or some sort of fulfillment, some bigger movement or idea beyond ourselves that we can look to for a kind of energy or surety or hope. And it made me think of this quote that I think is applicable here. Augustine said, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." And so this desire for some sort of leader just really points us to the desire for a righteous leader.
Right.
For someone who will lead justly, who doesn't have a criminal record.
Right.
For someone who does what they say they will do and who has the power and authority to deliver on what they say they will give us. And I think you had mentioned, Clark, that this brought to mind a certain passage. Is it the one that we're preaching on during Advent?
We're preaching. Yeah, I'm preaching this weekend on Isaiah 11. And just a thought that has been bubbling around in my mind the entire time is that the reason that we're drawn to populist leaders is we believe that they can actually fix the things that we want fixed in the world. And they make promises that they can get us there. And that feels compelling and it feels exciting. But as we've seen over and over and over, these leaders always fall short of that. And what you need is something that won't let you down. And you see this in Isaiah 11, where Israel metaphorically speaking, has been reduced to a stump of a tree. And out of this stump comes a little branch, a little green growth. And Isaiah is pointing to that and saying that there is a growth. A new king is actually what he's saying. He's talking about Jesus here. There is a day coming where a new growth will happen. And this new king will come in and will actually fulfill all the desires that we have regarding leadership. Isaiah even says that this new king, Jesus, is not going to judge by what his eyes see, and he won't decide disputes by what his ears hear, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. And what it's really saying is, like, our leaders are so limited. Like, how many times do we look around? This is the most popular show on Netflix right now. This is all you need to do is go make this show, and you will have millions of viewers around somebody who committed a crime, and you're going to cast doubt on it because the evidence was shaky at best. And you make a show, everybody gets involved, then you have a massive part of our society that is advocating for them to be released from prison. And it's saying, Isaiah is saying, hey, that's not the problem that we're going to have when this shoot grows and Jesus comes back and he judges and leads this way as a new king. That will never be our worry. It'll never be the thing that we're concerned about, because he's not relying on what his eyes see or what his ears hear. He just knows. He knows what's true and he knows what's right. And that's actually a hope that we can have. It's actually the greatest leader we could ever hope for. It's the one that we all want in the end. And why I want to point people towards the gospel, because our leaders are consistently going to let us down, and it's going to be devastating when we believe that we have the moral high ground and then it crumbles overnight. That's devastating. We're actually losing part of our identity if that is where our identity is. But Isaiah is saying something much better and something much greater is coming. And we can lean into that. And that actually provides a ton of hope. And it means that politics, state politics, local, federal, they aren't the end game. Like, in the end, we can just know that, like, everything is going to be okay because of what God has promised us.
That's such a good way to conclude our conversation today. I think, as always, our encouragement to all of you who are listening, to our church family, and to us, Clark and I, we want to be knowledgeable and thoughtful about our neighborhoods, our local communities. We want to be involved, not just knowledgeable, but involved in a way that has the potential to bring about good in the lives of people, and to know that that's limited, that we as people will continue to chase down these ideas and thoughts and pursuits that in and of themselves can't bring about what it is that we really desire.
Yeah.
And we won't ever elect a perfect leader because that doesn't exist. But we do have a hope in a coming king that is sure. And that passage in Isaiah is both beautiful and hopeful, and, as you mentioned, Clark, overtly political, which is interesting and a fitting way to just end our conversation today. So thanks for spending time on the podcast with me. For those of you listening, we love hearing from you. So send us your questions, your thoughts, your suggestions for future episodes. You can send all of that to podcast@fellowshipdenver.org. Thanks for joining us on the Vision for Life podcast. Special thanks to Adam Englund for our theme music, to Jesse Cowan, our producer, and to Judd Connell, who provides transcription for these episodes.